All right, so network security, as I'd mentioned, it cuts across different elements, as you're going to see. When we talk about network security, there are a lot of things that we need to really understand. Is it cyber security actually, right? What I need to maybe make it clear, as you are going to see, is that network security is one of the elements of a cyber security. So if you want to advance your understanding in details about network security, then also you need to figure out other cyber security elements that I'm just going to actually mention. So when we talk about network security, we're just going to concentrate on the one element of cyber security. So we have different areas that can bring issues within a network. Someone can hack our computers. Someone we can have viruses. We can also have people communicating, and then someone in the middle taps or interferes with that particular communication, right? So there are quite a number of things that we need to figure out when we talk about network security. So these particular elements, as I mentioned, within a network security, I was describing maybe a party. Like when you want to communicate with someone else, you normally expect to have a normal communication. But in between, we can have issues like someone is dropping into the line, capturing sensitive information. This information lands in a wrong hands, like for the hackers, and they might end up either stealing our data or bringing our networks down. So all these, whatever you're seeing here, you can also see some kind of countermeasures already also being shown within this particular screen, such as use of antivirus. You can see also you can be able to lock down your PC, physical security. Better still, when you're transmitting or communicating, we can use other third-party tools such as or rather firewalls, VPNs, to ensure that we communicate effectively without interference. We also have the malicious softwares that can be used within a network environment, such as rootkit. We are going to look at them, that hackers might always use to tamper or interfere with the normal network operations. So this particular diagram or these particular images pinpoints to what we are really going to look at, the attacks and how we can counter them and so on. So we just want to first understand the concept of security, because you have the network and the security. What do we need to really secure? Who is vulnerable when we're using these particular networks? And of course, the various countermeasures that we can implement in case of any given attack. Ideally, there are a lot of terminologies that we need to really understand. And that's why I started by mentioning that you need to be a very good network student. You need to understand the structure, or rather, you need to understand ideally the various types of networks. Don't know if someone has raised their hand. I was just checking. Right? So there are a lot of terminologies. So if we mention about security, then you need to know what is it? Is it the router that is being attacked? At what layer is the interference coming from? Is it the physical layer? Is it the transport layer? Right? So by that we need also to define some terminologies, like computer. Computer is an end device in itself. You use computer to connect to the network, right? So the end user needs to be protected. So if that computer is not safe, then chances are someone might steal their data, right? So We can design some different tools to help protect our computer, that is computer security. Our main focus here, not really looking at the computer or the devices themselves, but really just to try to understand how the concept of security is applied when different devices are communicating, right? So that is what we refer to as the network security. Transmission. During transmission, what normally happens? We are aware that when communication happens within a network, it is courtesy of the various protocols. So hackers normally just check on which protocol you're using. Like, for example, are you accessing a website? Which protocol are you using? Is it safe protocol, right? You want to purchase some items within an e-commerce website. Is that e-commerce website secure? So these are some of the things. You are downloading a file, and so on. All these. Then we have the mega concept that brings on board the two, and this is the internet security. You can't guarantee of an internet security if the network is not secure. What is internet, by the way? It's a short form of interconnected networks. Yeah, interconnection of many networks. So that means if we fail to secure a single network, then of course the whole internet is not really safe. So layman's understanding, or what you can take from the word security, relies on different things, right? Of course, freedom from risk. Am I safe where I am? Right? Even wherever you are, before you do anything else, you need to look at your safety. Freedom from doubt, anxiety, right? So that you boost your confidence, right? Security is something that will give you some surety, yeah, of your safety or your device's safety, right? Like having a group of guards, having, all the kind of protections. So, in a nutshell, for a good security to be implemented, we need to factor in different measures. Like, we're going to look at security measures. Particularly, we need to understand what is network security. Now that you have looked at security, a good network student understands that if three elements within a network are compromised, then an attack happens. We talk about the triad, yeah, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So these are the three main elements of a network. If they are compromised, then we can't be able to have a secure network. So confidentiality is just to give some assurance to the sender that whatever is being sent is not going to go to the wrong hands. Confidentiality, yeah, restoring, or rather having private information are not leaking to unauthorized users. So how do we maintain confidentiality? Again, you can bring on different concepts. You can use firewalls, for instance. You can use VPNs, right? So that it gives you some tools to be able to decrypt and encrypt, like the provision of keys, where communicating devices exchange the private and public keys, right? We are going to look at cryptography and how we can reinforce this particular confidentiality. Of course, authentication still relies on the confidentiality, right? You have to give or you have to confirm who is communicating and who is going to receive this particular message. Integrity, in a layman's understanding, is ensuring that whatever is sent is not altered, or the message that is being transmitted is not edited, right? The way it was sent is the way it should be able to be received. So it doesn't matter which media is being used to send this particular message, as long as the integrity is not compromised, right? Integrity issues here is actually active hacking. So we can talk about passive attacks and active attacks. So if integrity has been compromised, then actually there is some sufficient evidence that an attack is taking place. And of course, we have availability. When you're using any network resource, it could be a device such as a printer, it could be a Wi-Fi. If you realize that you can't be able to access that particular resource when you need it, that means it's not available, right? So any attempt of a hacker interfering with the availability of a particular resource, then we say that is an attack that has actually happened. So we need to ensure that we maintain the three elements: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that is the end of network security topic. Once we know how to manage the three, of course, at some point we can't really 100% handle these issues, right? Especially when it comes from you, the human being. You see, human beings are the ones who even cause a lot of problems, right? You're told to use a strong password, you don't use. You're told not to access these websites, so you access them. As I mentioned, one element of cyber security is the network security. So that's the difference. So cyber security is a broad concept. I know most students have always been asking me, what's the difference between cyber security and network security? In cyber security, you need to actually look at these additional elements: information security, how to secure information. You better still need to know how to secure the network itself, what you're learning right now. You also need to know how to apply security within the different applications that are being used. You need to know how to perform some good training to the users. And in case of any attack, you should be in a position to perform some kind of recovery procedures, what we refer to as business continuity planning. So all in all, to start the journey towards understanding cybersecurity is to know how to secure the network. As I'd mentioned, security depends with actually what you want to secure. So it cuts across different fields, right? As I'd mentioned, you say even within, if you're learning about cybersecurity, you need to look at information network application. So you also need to see how you can apply some secure measures like use of cryptography, which really a set of some just encryption and decryption tools, networking, operating systems. If there's an environment that hackers normally use to penetrate a network, is the operating system. Yeah, so they plant a lot of malicious codes within the network operating system. Then it can cause harm. Also, the databases, especially if you have users that resides in different branches and they share some database. So hackers can be able to tap into those particular databases and cause harm. Right now we have a different tools or other technologies that are being implemented already established networks such as artificial intelligence, blockchain technologies, Internet of Things. So all these brings or rather increases the chances of being a target. So we also need to factor in that. We talked about we need also to ensure that there are no design flaws in terms of implementing or rather developing a software, for example, or coming up with the hardware. We are going to look at this, right? Most manufacturers normally come up with hardwares that have not conformed to the specified procedures, or rather, they don't follow the right development methods. So what happens? If a hacker knows that there's a loophole within a hardware, they can always utilize that. Or if they have some loophole, or they realize that some loopholes are there within the software, they can utilize that. Better still, of course, I've talked about softwares, and that is based on the programming languages. These particular programming languages are good and are also bad. Yeah, you can. We have this the script kiddies. I don't know whether you have not you know that particular term. Yeah, where people can always run a lot of scripts and carry out damages across. We also have the social engineering, use of psychology to manipulate other people's mind into providing sensitive information where human meets the computer, right? So all these are areas where security can always be applied, and at the same time, security can always be compromised. So to be a good network security student, or if you want to practice good security, you need to have that mindset, right? You need to have that security mindset. What specifics are you dealing with? You see, when you talk about security, as I've mentioned, it's a lot of, there are a lot of things. Are they the guards manning a particular building? Are they the system, such as the computer? So when we talk about system, maybe you have to pinpoint exactly what the system is. What is the weakest point, right? And you realize that even if you're a good network administrator, the weakest point is always the user. If they're not properly trained, then they can always be the source of attack, right? And of course, how can we reinforce these particular loopholes? So why do we need security? Why is learning network security important? Right? Of course, first is to protect sensitive information, right? Across the different industries. It could be school, it could be security organization, it could be health care industries, and so on. So we need to protect the vital information. And because we are really learning a lot of things, you need to understand that when you are, for example, doing some kind of when you want to implement the backup procedures, there's a word that is really escaping me. If you want to maintain the right backup procedures, of course, when you are drafting a proper incidents recovery plan, for example, you need to look at what are you going to give priority in case of an attack, for example. So someone has told you that, you know what, this particular hospital has been attacked, right? So what are the priorities that you're going to give to a particular hardware or rather a software, and that one is going to lead you to the crucial information that needs to be backed up first as you figure out which one to back up last. Provide authentication, authorization, all that, right? Access control. We have different ways of handling these. Use of passwords, implementing firewalls. If you have a router, you can have the access control list to allow some traffic and to eliminate some traffic, and of course guarantee availability of resources. So we go back to the CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, a typical example of why we need network security can be seen from this particular diagram. So there's this nurse, I believe, who is trying to communicate some sensitive information, and I believe this should be a patient on the left side, right? So they're sharing a lot of sensitive information, as you can see. The serial number, date of birth, credit card number, medical records, the test scores, and so on. Then at the top left, top right, I can see there's this guy who is just waiting. So you see, when communication is happening in a network, there's always there are always bad people just waiting to spring into action, right? So they are there to do a lot of harm, right? They are there to do a lot of harm. First, they carry out passive attack, eavesdrop, right? Listen to what people are communicating, capture that. Then, as they continue gathering information, they can now proceed to active attacks, whereby the bad guy now takes control of the system. So what happens? The final result, you realize that the bad guy will cut the original sender and leave them out, and the bad guy will now start communicating, maybe with the school nurse, or he can cut out the school nurse and start communicating with Alice. And I believe that's what will happen. He's going to cut out the school nurse and start receiving sensitive information from Alice. So why do we need security then? We need security to be able to protect those sensitive information. So there's a question here that maybe I'll pose. Can you think of other ways a bad guy can use the data he obtains to cause harm or attack? Give examples and reasons for attacks. Based on our earlier diagram, what are some of the ways that the bad guy can cause harm with the data? Anyone? Any example and reasons for attack? Hello? What are some of the ways a bad guy, this is a bad guy, right? What are some of the ways the bad guy can use the data he obtains, right, to cause harm or attack? Examples and reasons for attacks?
Well, they might be obtaining personal information for theft or even identity theft.
Good, very good. Ideally, one of the repercussions is to steal sensitive information for identity theft, and you know what that one might lead to. Good. Any other? Any other reason? Any other reason?
Defamation.
Yeah. Ideally, we are going to see at the tail end of this discussion why they do that, right? Yeah. Some for defamation and so on. You see, the end result is that if it's an organization, the organization is going to lose competitive advantage to the other businesses, for instance, right? A case of a bank. If they realize that, if clients realize that their information is not secure, they might leave. Okay. So you're told, can you think of what can prevent a guy from access to your private? So what ways can we use? Or what are some of the procedures? What are some of the basics that you can use to offer preventive mechanism so that your data is not stolen? Any preventive mechanism?
Yes, sir, we can. If we go by the traditional means, we could use honeypots for intrusion detections. We could also use firewalls
You can also use
to
files.
filter traffic.
All right. So there are quite a number, and we are going to maybe.
And also,
So as we proceed, we are going to maybe look at some of them and maybe see how we can implement them. So these are typical example that I was really trying to explain before. So we have Bob sharing some information with Alice. So that is a network because there's transmission, right? There's a channel here. Communication is happening, right? It is the intention of Bob and Alice to communicate securely without any problem. But as it may, this particular intruder known as Trudy can tap into the communication channel and either intercept, alter, delete, or add other codes, right? So in the typical scenario, in real life scenario, these are just example. Bob could mean something else. Alice could mean something else. It doesn't really mean need to be human beings. It could be a router communicating with another router, like sharing the routing table or routing information, right? It could be a particular computer within a network propagating or broadcasting maybe some new IP address or rather some data, right? And we have the isolated cases, right? These particular bad guys, right, who can always be there to tap. And so as I mentioned, it could be browsers, for example, when you're purchasing online, can be client server systems, routing, exchanging information, DNS servers. So it's not just about Alice and Bob. We are really looking at a holistic picture here, right? Now, the bad guy can do a lot. They can do eavesdropping, impersonation, what my friend has already mentioned, right? They can hijack. They can perform some denial of service attack. So we need to understand. You see, we need to have that mindset that we've already mentioned. You should be curious. Yeah, you should be thinking, what is the weakest link that these particular people can use? Do I have antivirus, for example? These are just basics. Are my users trained? Are the protocols we are using secure? Right? Because the bad guys are equally sharp, right? They are just there to check on the system and utilize those particular loopholes. So ideally, we have different terminologies, and will allow me, actually I won't really go through them one by one. Something like a hacker should be able to know vulnerability. Vulnerability is actually a weakness in the system. Yeah, it's where someone with bad intention can use to exploit a given system. Vulnerabilities actually appears or can happen from the hardware point of view and from the software point of view, and even when you connect the systems, right? So the attack is the actual assault within the system, right? It could be an application that someone has implanted or rather have a malicious code, right? So all these are terminologies that we need to understand. Threat is an action or event that might compromise the security. Is the environment. If the environment is conducive for a hacker or rather the bad guys to perform their actions, then we say that is a threat. That environment is a threat, right? Not having the right security mechanisms, right? We can also talk about malwares. Social engineering is a concept, as I mentioned, that you can use to psychologically manipulate someone. So this one could be via email, get crucial information via email, telephone calls, viruses, firewall. Someone has mentioned you can configure a firewall. Remember, firewall can be both hardware and software, which can be configured. So ideally, when we talk about security, we talked about the CIA. So I won't really go through that again. The ripple effects at the market perception. We also need to figure out the physical security. How do we protect our equipment? How do we protect our facility, right? said that if we don't implement this CIA, then even the businesses might not look good, right? Like the competitors might take advantages. We might lose our partners and so on. So how do we implement a typical security system? We need to factor out what are the vulnerable or vulnerabilities, what are the threat, right? If these two matches, then definitely there will be an attack. So it's our responsibility to ensure that the systems are not vulnerable and the environment is not conducive for a given kind of attack. But let's say attack happens, right? You have done your part, but the attack has happened. So you can always have some control measures to eliminate or rather to reduce the spread of this particular attack, right? So what we say is that you reduce the impact. Let's say if you have divided your networks into different maybe network addresses, if one particular router has been attacked, you can remove it from the network so that this one doesn't escalate to the other types of networks. Vulnerabilities, as I mentioned, it could be poor design of the hardware or software, not following the right development standards, poor management, right? You see, you don't need to be somewhere physically for you to manage the network, right? So you can set up the right security measures, such as introduction of policy. These are documents that you can always have, yeah, for checks and balances. The networks also needs to be implemented properly, and it starts from the staff that does that, right? So you don't need to look for people who really don't have the technical know-how. Who is vulnerable? You, as an individual. You are. Financial institutions, ISPs, name them, right? Almost every organization or any kind of person or equipment or device that connects to a network is vulnerable. We can categorize these vulnerabilities into physical vulnerabilities, hardware, software, transmission, where we talked about integrity issues. The lethal one is human vulnerabilities, yeah? And that's what we really need to check. So apart from that, we talked about threats. Threats comes in different categories again. We have natural threats that you can't really do away, you can't do anything about, such as earthquakes. But yes, you can have very nice procedures to counter these problems. You don't need to wait for rainy season such as this to know that your your devices or your routers are within the first floor, the basement, and there's no all these, right? Again, we have unintentional threats, right? Of course, these are acts that you can associate with stupidity, laziness, carelessness. Yeah, you are told some procedures and you don't want to follow them. Then you have intentional, malicious ways of doing things, right? Like the hackers themselves, they can do some kind of malicious activities with different reasons, right? So some terminologies that you also need to understand, for example, is the security service. We know that every application, or rather, when you have a server somewhere, we need to activate these particular security services just to give us some kind of reinforcement. We also have the mechanism. Mechanism is a way that can enable you to either detect, prevent, and recover from a given type of attack. So, what you have looked at when Bob and Alice were communicating was the first normal flow. Then the bad guy could change the flow of information into these four diagrams down here: A, B, C, D, and E. So the hacker or the attacker can compromise the confidentiality, that is intercepting, as you can see, creating some kind of it redirects the flow of information. A modification, change of the message, They can also fabricate. You can see the last diagram. That's what I was mentioning. So the hacker can always cut off one party and start communicating, sharing confidential information. So these are the forms of attacks in the real life scenario. So we have two major categories of attacks. One is passive. I have already explained this, right? Especially when there's some kind of eavesdropping, someone listening and picking the confidential information. And when someone springs into action and alters or rather changes the message. So there's quite a number of examples to go to achieve when you do the passive and active forms of attacks. Attacks happen either through the hardware, but they can mainly happen through the software, right? And when talk about software, we have different categories of softwares: programming softwares, application, and so on. So for an attack to happen, they normally use the malwares or the malicious softwares. So we have different categories of malicious software, such as the keyloggers that can be used. So you know what keyloggers are: monitoring or capturing or stealing the whatever you're typing. They can always record. Spoofing, faking of email address. You think that this email address is coming from KCA. If you look at it carefully, it's coming from a different user. Maybe someone has just introduced a single character. A sniffer, these are kind of passive attacks. You can perform eavesdropping, right? You can also do some social engineering, gaining access to the system. Phishing, setting up of fake websites to capture confidential information. Phishing is actually a very lethal attack because you can always have a particular page or a website presenting itself as a legit website. So they used to collect your sensitive information, such as bank information. Of course, you have farming, which redirects you to non-existing or a bogus website. These websites, they're always active at given point. Once they have already done the damage, they pull them off, right, and do not access them again. Now, when you are looking at a communication within the network, this is a model that shows two devices communicating, or rather sending and receiving data. So we see the sender sending the information, the receiver sending the information. At the center there, we have the channel. This channel can be used to secure how the data is being transferred, right? So we can have the trusted party reinforcing the security. What this particular model, as a network security student, will help you achieve is to be able to do the following: design a suitable algorithm, maybe have nice crypto keys to be able to be used, ideally to design a virtual private network, right, that can be able to pass very sensitive information, and of course ensure that you can always come up with secure protocols, right? Communication cannot happen without protocols. Yes, you can have your softwares, you can have your hardwares, but you need to have those particular protocols. So ideally, you need to understand which protocols is being used in physical layer, for example. Which protocols are used in the second layer of the OSI model, because that is the layer that normally we can get the basic protocols, right? So that you secure your entire network. At the end of this particular tunnel, also you need to secure the user, for example, right? You need to secure the computing resources, such as the use of memory, processor, the data, the processors. So how do we achieve that? You can see there's a gatekeeper function here. It could be a firewall, right? Or it could be any other tool. So you can implement this so that the opponent from the other end cannot be able to get access to your device. We are still going to look at methods of defense. This is just a highlight. But as you implement your network, you need to have some kind of defense mechanism, right? You can have hardware controls, policies, physical controls, software controls. We are going to mention them, but more specifically, I'll appreciate if you have the soft one, the policy that you can implement from our end. See, policy is just something that you can think of and figure out the environment that a particular network is implemented and see what should be done and what should not be done. And you draft a policy. You need to take the inventory of the devices that are within that particular network. So why is it hard to understand or to actually implement a network or security in a network? Of course, it's hard. It's not like just implementing security within a single computer, right? So one is that network comprises of interconnected systems of systems, right? As they are mentioning here, your system can be secure, but what about the other connected devices? Too many things depending on small number of systems, especially when you talk about Internet of Things, right? We have very many interconnected things within that are using, for example, a particular network, right? So there are high chance that a hacker can use one of the devices to bring down the entire network. Ease of attacks, right? We have threats from users, use of cheap baby hardwares, security not built from. We have also human in the loop. I mean, these are just things that contribute to the hard network being hard to properly secure. Computers are ubiquitous. Ubiquitous simply means like laptops, for example, or the smartphones. You keep on moving around with them. So you can secure the computer in one network. Someone moves, go and access another network, and you start from zero. So ubiquitous, they are everywhere, right? And I've so far mentioned the Internet of Things, which actually contributes to difficulty of implementing this particular network. Having said that, we have very many benefits actually of network security. We have many. One is to protect the business from the malicious softwares, protect the end user themselves. Also you should give good protection for both data, information, right, as well as the network. Increases recovery time after a breach. This one is a heavy loaded sentence. Increases recovery time. It depends with how prepared you are. Otherwise, the time is not going to be that small. Network prevents unauthorized users and any other advantage that you know, right? So I know there are quite a number of benefits anyway. So consequences of breaching a network security. These are what I was asking you, right? Loss of available clientele. You can be a victim of legal suits, right? Someone might sue you, or a firm might sue a particular organization. I don't really want to ask you questions regarding how this can be achieved, but hope you understand. Financial loss, right? Like banks can lose money when there's a kind of attack. Loss of partnership, collaborations, right? Even the government might not give you the leeway of doing your business if there are frequent attacks. right? If clients keep on complaining, government can always take an action, and they can always revoke your permits or licenses. Competitive advantage will be lost to the other people. Soil reputation, right? I've known of many businesses or organizations that have had soil reputation due to one reason or the other. So they had to start again from scratch. You have to relocate. Apart from relocating, you have to rebrand. Or you can also lose your data. People can also use your computer resources in a bad way, right? Reputation loss that's a repeat. Identity theft, you have heard about that, right? So these are kind of losses that can be presented there due to security attacks, right? So that is just a simple introduction of network security, what you should be able to do, the countermeasures. We are going to look at them next.